Hi guys, Sam Dillinger, My Tech Engine Light TV, and we're back. This is episode 3, 4, something like that. I don't know, but more importantly, I want you to notice that with the breeze blowing and the way that I'm standing, it kind of looks like a superhero. Just missing the cape, right? Okay, so what we're gonna do today is a compression test. This is a bit more advanced diagnostics. This isn't something that is just super easy, real quick knockout at home type thing. I mean, obviously you can do it at home, but especially on a 6-cylinder or 8-cylinder engine, it can be more involved. Still, you can save yourself a ton of money by doing this at home, and it's not that difficult. So I guess I would put this more in like the mid-level range. So let's talk about it. What is it? The compression in a 4-stroke engine is the stroke that builds the power. As the piston is coming up, it's sealed. Both of the valves are closed. It's already got the intake charge with the air and the fuel mixture. Just a note on that, 14.7 to 1. That is the air to fuel mixture that goes into your engine, just in case you wanted to know that. You'll need to know that actually later on for much more advanced drivability style diagnostics. In this case, doesn't really matter, just kind of a neat fact, I guess. So as the piston is on its way up, the valves are closed and the air charge is already in there. And now as it gets to the top of the compression stroke, that's when the spark ignites, and that's what actually powers your vehicle. So if that chamber is not sealed, and I mean even just a little bit, you have a drivability problem instantly. So your piston rings, the valves, the seat, the face actually of the valve, or the seat, however you want to describe it, in the cylinder head, those things all have to be intact, as well as the spark plug being seated and tight. Trying to think if there's anything else, like the head gasket, the gasket between the cylinder head and the engine block. If there's a problem there, anywhere that compression can escape, it will instantly give you a drivability problem in the form of a misfire. So as a general rule, without looking it up, you want to see at least 150 PSI. Some cars lower, some cars higher, some cars much higher. On a diesel engine, it's significantly higher. So this necessarily doesn't really apply to a diesel engine, just because of how vastly different it is. And we'll actually get into that in a different episode. Just know that if you have a diesel engine, you should probably stop here. So that's essentially what it is. It's just pressure. It's compression pressure, measured in pounds per square inch. So we're gonna take a look at how to measure it, what the numbers mean, and the variety of tests that there is for compression tests, because there is more than one way to do it. And I'll show you two today. The third one, I don't actually have a problem with the car, so even if I showed it to you, it wouldn't do any good. And that's a wet compression test, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So first things first, you have to remove the fuel pump relay, right? So here we are on this car. You can see right here that it says fuel pump. And the way that you do that then is we're just gonna set that here, get my pliers, which are way too big for this, but believe it or not, it's the only pliers that I have on hand right now. So you see there, the empty space and the fuel pump's next to it. So that means to me that it's this one. Be careful when you're doing that. So you see the tabs on the bottom of this relay, right? Like, you don't want to just yank it out or start doing this with it. You'll bend those tabs, and you have more relays. You don't have any spare relays. You could take one and disable a different system and put it there if you had to get home or something like that. But you definitely don't want to just take and leave it out and not put it back. You don't have spares like that. So reason we're doing this is actually for the tester. You don't want to get fuel sprayed into your tester, so that'll actually ruin the seals in it. So we'll take that guy out, and now we are going to start the car and just let it run for a second until it runs out of fuel, and then we won't have any gas in there that will ruin the tester. So we're gonna do that. And you'll see that the car's actually running with the fuel pump relay removed, and after a couple of seconds here, it's going to cycle through all of the fuel that was in the fuel lines, in the fuel rail, in the injectors, and it's going to turn off here momentarily. Okay, car stalled out. We got rid of all the fuel in the injectors, lines, all of that stuff. So now we're clean there. Now what we're going to need to do is start on the compression test, right? The way that we're going to do that is to remove the spark plugs. That is your I mean, they didn't make it as an access portal, but for what we're doing, this is your access portal to the combustion chamber. It's the only way that you can even access it at all without taking literally half of your engine apart. Like, the only other way that you could do it is to take the cylinder head off. We're not going to do that. So let's go here, and we're going to take this cover off. Obviously pretty easy, it's just got little tabs on there. Okay, in the service manual, anywhere that you'll see it in service information, you'll see that to do a compression test, it's going to tell you that you need to take all of the spark plugs out. I actually once did it just to see the difference, and it does actually make a bit of a difference in your readings. So if you have something that you need to do this for, like for actual diagnostic purposes, you really do need to take all of the spark plugs out. It will actually affect your reading some. Also, you could get a false reading if, say, this cylinder was sealed, this one isn't, and if there's a leak in between these two cylinders. If you have this one still sealed, you could get a false reading on this. So you don't want to do that. Believe me, you don't want to get any false readings. Sometimes diagnosing a drivability problem can be difficult enough without trying to trick yourself. So we're going to remove all of the spark plugs. We're going to start by removing the ignition coils. And just because it's the weekend and I don't feel like dealing with it, we are going to take this little guy out of the way just to make my life easier. You know what else would have made my life easier? If I would have remembered to grab any of my other 75 different pairs of pliers. That would have been such a good idea. Okay. Right? Remember that from the last video when I told you about squeezing the hose like that? There you go. Pops it right off. And there is the fourth connector. Okay, so these ones, you can see here, these bolts on top of your ignition coils here. There's just 4 of them, 10 millimeter, nice and easy. They're not going to be on super tight. You don't have to worry about anything like that. Here's something that I'll tell you, I don't really know if it's a tip, I guess, but just maybe the way that I do get things, I suppose. I use the cowl panel for all kinds of things. It's relatively sealed if you don't have anything super small or like a clip or something. There's holes in it, obviously, but for bolts, man, it works great. It is such a good container for stuff like that. So I always, and you'll see me do it tons of times, I always put my stuff up here in the cowl panel. Just a good collection spot for it. So, also a note on the ignition coils. So we're going to start taking these guys out. That's your ignition coil. Nothing real exciting or interesting about that guy. I line them up in the order that they came out in. It is not necessary for you to do that. You can put them in whatever order. If you went to a parts department and asked them what the part number is, you would find out that the part number for all 4 of those coils is the same, which means they're interchangeable. I am not built that way. I am not going to take these coils out and put them back in differently. That will definitely give me a twitch, like possibly even nightmares. So we're not going to do that. So there's a note about that. Now we have our trusty spark plug socket, and it just goes in right like that. And this is just my 3/8 ratchet. Nothing special here. I mean, this one I bought from Mac Tools, and it's got the bent handle and the flex head, all that stuff. You don't need it to have all of those things. It's easier, but it doesn't need to be. The one thing that I would say is get yourself an extension for this, because if you look here, you'll see with the extension on how much room I have to swing the handle. Without it, you could do this, by the way. You can put it in and it will still fit. You have much less room to swing the handle. So just for the sake of making your life easier, well, actually, technically for the video, for making my life easier, we're going to use the extension. And I'm going to show you right now why I like having the ratchet with the flex head. Because when something gets loose, you can turn it into a speed wrench pretty effectively. Just like that, right? Nice and easy. Also, it's worth looking at your spark plugs. If you have some type of drivability issue and you're getting to a point where you're doing a compression test for whatever reason, take it out and look at it. Look for any black marks down the sides that indicate any kind of crack. Check the tip. This actually is what burns your air-fuel mixture. Obviously, it's a spark plug. So you want to look at this and see, is it discolored? Like some blackness from carbon is what you would expect to see. Is it green? Is it pink? Is it like super crusty? Something like that. That will help you in your diagnosis if you suspect a loss of compression. So, all right, now let's get these other ones out of here and we'll take a look at that. Okay, so now we have the spark plugs out. I figured we may as well take a short break right there. No one wants to watch me struggle just taking those things out. So here is our compression tester. Whoa, that was like, oh man, how could you do that to me? Traitor, this is treason. All right, we'll get that piece in a minute. Luckily, we don't need it for what we're doing right now, so that's okay. Just make sure that you don't forget. If you do like I did and drop it in there, just don't forget it's there. All right, so I actually did the same thing with the spark plugs and lined them up right where they came from, just because it makes me feel better about who I am as a person. So that actually looks like it could be too big. Maybe this one is too. Actually, we might need, don't tell me we need that one. No, we don't, it's too big. Okay. Yeah, that looks a bit more realistic. So let's try this guy here. And I actually wanted you guys to see me putting this together so that you can see just sort of how to piece it together, right? Because no one is going to show you that. You're not going to see it in the instructions. And sometimes it's as easy as just taking the hose out and putting it in, but other times it's not. You got to kind of figure it out a little bit. So you'll see right there, I want you to take a look at that right there. Let me just loosen that up a little bit. See the O-ring right there? There's one here. So it needs to be tight against that so that it seals, okay? And then you just thread this in there just as if it was a spark plug. All right, that's in. And now you just have this fitting here, right? You just pull the collar back and plug it on, and now you can see what we're doing there. So let's see if I can find a good place where you guys can look at that at. Ah, perfect. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna crank the engine, and I'm trying to think. I believe that the way that you're supposed to do this is 3 compression strokes is what you need to make sure that you have the correct compression reading. If you've been doing this for a long time like me, you can hear the compression strokes It's not something you're probably going to be able to pick up if you're doing this on your own. So I would say let's go for like 10 seconds, 10 to 12 seconds, something like that. You don't want to run it too long either because you can overheat the starter. So we don't want to do that either. So 10 to 12 seconds, that should give you as much compression as you're going to get out of that chamber. So let's do that. First, let's put this away before I drop something else. Also, let's see if my great big arm is going to fit in there. I'm going to guess no, but we're going to try it. I was right. Okay, so we got that piece back, and it was laying on a shield down in there, but it's important to show you guys that because things like that happen, you know, like you're going to knock things over, something's going to fall, whatever. But even though this is laying on a shield down there, as I'm cranking the engine, if for some reason this thing bounced, it could be catastrophic. So we're not going to do that. We're not going to take any chances. Now we're going to cycle the engine. All right, what do we get here? Yeah, we got 160 PSI. Okay, so, and you'll notice that it's not dropping down because of this button right here. This actually holds my compression in the gauge. Wait, does it hold it in the gauge or is it just in the tube? Let's find out. Ah, yes. Okay, so this is my release. This is how you would normally just let it go. So that will tell you too, by watching this, if that starts to come down, then you have a leak in there. So you do the compression test. If it's normal or close to normal, and then you can watch it. If the gauge starts to slowly creep, you have a small leak, and that could be anything from like a hairline crack in the cylinder head or a hairline crack in one of your piston rings, something like that, or a seized piston ring possibly. There's a bunch of different things that could cause a real slow leak like that. Same thing with the valves, the valve face, the valve seat, all of those things. So you saw what the compression is there. Interesting thing to note about that. I said 10 to 12 seconds. I let it go for about 10 seconds or so, and then I took my finger off of the starting button because this is one of the newer style vehicles that has just the key fob, right? Though you can't just plug it in and turn the key on. This, when it loses a signal like that, it'll attempt to start on its own for I think 20 or 25 seconds. So when I actually took my finger off, it kept doing it on its own. I actually had to press the button again to get it to stop. So that's why it actually even went longer than what I said. Now comes one of the most important parts of the compression test is the comparison. Okay, because we have the first one done, and I love it when a plan comes together. This is why it's good to have good tools, because that stayed on there. Believe me when I tell you, you do not want to see what happens when this piece unscrews from this piece down in there. It gets ugly fast. All right, that aside, we will plug this into cylinder number 2. Get that guy tight. And eventually we'll plug that in. Okay, there we go. And we're just going to leave that here-ish for you guys to look at. Okay, now we're going to do it again. And what did we get there? 155. So it's normal to have a bit of a difference in between the cylinders, yeah? It doesn't have to be exact. There will be a spec, and that's how you actually use that button. I'll show you when it drops the pressure on the next one, but that's what it's for. You just do that to release the pressure. A note about safety. You saw what I did with just unplugging this to release the pressure. You shouldn't actually do that, specifically because let's say that you didn't have the fuel pump disconnected and hadn't run all of the fuel pressure out of the vehicle, If you do that, that's all going to blow right in your face. If the car's hot and you have not necessarily combustion gases, but some of the inert gases that will be in your cylinders, you can get that right in your face. So not a good thing. All right, moving on. Cylinder number 3. Excellent. Got the piece back again. 2 for 2. All right. And okay, we're gonna have to move this. I guess we'll just lay it there. You guys will just have to adjust your angle of viewing. Okay, let's see what we got on that one. 155, exactly the same as the last one. So now you'll see what the pressure release does. Kind of anticlimactic, I know, but that's what it does. All right, and now we're gonna go to the next one. Last one, actually, for this vehicle. And got that screwed in there. Someday that will go on there. There we go. All right. And we'll just lay that back on the battery again. Seems like a good spot. Okay, last one. Okay, let's take a look at that. 160. So all of them were within 5 psi. That tells me that my compression pressure is okay. Like I said, without looking up the spec, looking in the book, if all 4 of your cylinders, on obviously a 4-cylinder, are right within 5 psi of each other like that, you can be relatively certain you don't have a problem with your compression, I should say. If there's a problem that led you to do a compression test and they're all reading relatively the same, it's time to start looking somewhere else. Normally, when you have one that has low compression, you saw all of them were between 155 to 160. You'll have one that's at, say, 80 or 50. Hopefully not 0. That's really bad. Just so you know, if you did happen to see one that has 0, that means you have like a hole in the piston, or it broke one of the connecting rods. You shouldn't have to wonder. You probably wouldn't even need to do a compression test at that point. What we're going to do now is we're going to put all of this stuff back together, and then I'm going to show you a running compression test. So we're going to do that now. All right, we have everything put back together. We're not going to spend a whole lot more time on this because the next thing that we're going to do is almost a replay of the first part, except this is a running compression test. But before I do that, let me just tell you real quick what the third style of compression test is. It's called a wet compression test. So what you would do is exactly what we did. You would take everything out and test all of the cylinders while they're dry, right? And then you get a little bit of engine oil. Just get the same kind of engine oil that your engine takes, and you don't need much. Not like 2 drops. You'll need like a dropper full. Would be about the right amount. That'll tell you if you have a problem with like the piston ring area, your oiling ring, something like that. Because if it's dry and you get your readings, and then in the cylinder that you suspect you have a problem, you put some oil in there and it boosts the compression momentarily back to what it's supposed to be, you have a problem in there in that cylinder, and it's going to be in the compression rings and or oiling rings. So that's a wet compression test. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with this engine, so we don't have that luxury. But we will take a look at the running compression test. So I've buttoned everything back up, started the car, let it spit and sputter for a second till it got the fuel back, got all the air purged out of the lines and stuff, so on and so forth. Here we are. We have the gauge hooked up, and we're going to just leave it sit Trying to find a secure place where you guys can see it at too. I guess we'll just try that. So now you're gonna see what's gonna happen is that it'll come up and then it's gonna like oscillate, which it's supposed to do because it's continually pushing compression into there. And there's a specification for a running compression test, just like there is for a regular compression test. You need to know all of that information before you start. Otherwise, you'll be looking right at a problem and not know it. So let's take a look at what a running compression test looks like. All right, so, and what you would notice, just like you would think, it's going to be less than what your actual dry compression is. And I did not look up the specs for this as far as running compression test, but you'll just have to take my word for it that this is okay. That's about what you would expect to see. And you can see too, the whole engine is shaking. It's just telling you that you have a misfire. So we're gonna shut this off. Okay, and release the compression there. That's it. That's our compression test. So you would want to do this before you go to a shop to see, like, is it even worth it? Because if you did have a hole or if you had a broken piston ring, something like that, it might not even be worth taking it to a shop. It's not hard to do this. You can borrow this from the local parts store for a really small fee. You got to give it back unbroken, of course, but that's it. And then you'll have an idea. Is it even worth it? Should we start thinking about a new engine or maybe a different car? So that's it. That's all I got for you this week, guys. Make sure that you follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Come check us out on YouTube. Like and share all of our content anywhere that you can. And we will see you next week, guys.